Turning now to the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 through 11. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. You know that when you were pagans, you were enticed and led astray to idols that could not speak. Therefore I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God ever says, "Let Jesus be cursed." And no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. Now, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in every one. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the one Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another the discernment of spirits, to another various kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually, just as the Spirit chooses. Now, dear Lord, we pray that you will choose to be with us and to give us insight and inspire us by your word. We pray, Lord, that we will be able to understand your will and that we will live it out faithfully. Thank you, God, for the blessing of your word and your loving presence among us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr.'s day. The day naturally brings to mind contemplation of the state of race relations in America. Martin Luther King Jr. is recognized as the national leader in promoting the social and political equality of all Americans, but especially in promoting the social and political equality of African Americans. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial called "I Have a Dream." And some historians have called his speech the greatest speech ever given. You remember the speech. Yeah, he spoke about having a dream or a vision of a United States where there would be racial and ethnic equality. A country where people would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. He began by saying he was at the Freedom Rally that day to dramatize a shameful condition in our country. He pointed out that the reason for the March on Washington was to protest the injustice of segregation, unfair housing, the denial of voting rights, and the abuses of police and the legal system. King hearkened back to the Declaration of Independence as a promissory note of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all people. He said that it was a promissory note that was returned to African Americans with the label "insufficient funds." He called upon the nation to make the words of the Declaration of Independence true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I've been reading from a couple of different sources about the idea that our country began with a fundamental flaw that some would call a sin, an original sin. And I'm coming to accept that as correct. One of those sources for the idea is a book by Jim Wallis entitled "America's Original Sin." Well, what was America's original sin? The original sin was deciding that the native populations of the Americas were not people. By a papal decree in the 1400s, supported by a Supreme Court decision in 1823, it was decided by European people that the indigenous peoples of non-European lands were not human and therefore had no rights. Now, I told you all about this last September in our Native American Sunday. This is the main tenet of the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery states that the Americas were discovered by Europeans, even though there were people living here before the Europeans arrived. The doctrine did not recognize any legitimate claims of the native peoples in the land and resources on the land because they were not people. They were considered animals. Do not think that this is an old idea that is long dead and buried. The doctrine of discovery, as stated in the Supreme Court decision of 1823, was used as recently as 2005 to deny rights to Native Americans. The doctrine of discovery was used as a reason for enslaving people as well. The lands of Africa were also under the authority of this doctrine of discovery, and so the people living in Africa, once again, were not considered human. And since they were not considered human, it's okay to kill them and to enslave them. So Europeans captured people in Africa, and then they sailed them to the Americas, and they sold them as slaves. And the policies of the European Americans was to see the Native Americans as vermin, to be eliminated, and to see Africans as trained animals worthy only to be slaves. People everywhere throughout history have had this idea that there needs to be disposable people. People of all times and places have felt a need to have people that did not count as people. They were less than human, so that the dominant people of the society could feel guilt-free for making others do the dangerous and unpleasant work that the dominant people did not want to do. Most societies have felt that slavery was a necessity for their society to exist. People of ancient Rome believed that without slavery their economy would collapse. In the pre-Civil War South felt the same way. Without slaves, the Southern economy would collapse. So when the U.S. Constitution was first written, there was a compromise between the North that did not want slavery and the South that demanded slavery. And the compromise resulted in that slaves were to be counted as 3/5 of a human being. In a very real sense, 3/5 of a human being is really no human being at all. Many people feel that the Emancipation Proclamation, with the victory of the North over the South in the American Civil War, began the end of this original sin of the United States. These two things began to correct the moral and ethical wrong which slavery was for a democratic nation. Civilized people were asking, can slavery and democracy exist together? And the answer was, and still is, not in a moral, ethical, or ideological sense. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that democracy and slavery are antithetical ideas and practices. The United States began its history accepting slavery as legal. But most peoples today would recognize slavery as a crime against humanity and an immoral practice. Therefore, slavery and the denigration of native populations was an original sin for our nation. It is a sin which we have struggled to overcome with much progress, but it is a sin which we also continue to struggle with. Much of the old prejudices and injustices still continue to the present day. The call in recent years that racism is dead is either spoken in ignorance or once again trying to ignore the problem. Problem is, as a nation, we never really dealt with it. We never really dealt in a healthy way the dissolution of slavery and the continued denigration of native populations. What whites did was to push people of color onto reservations and into ghettos. People of color were marginalized and segregated. So the solution to race was out of sight, out of mind. People of color were still seen as subhuman. Much of the prejudices which were formed during the times of legal slavery found their way into policies, programs, and structures of our government and society. Prejudice became institutionalized, and once institutionalized, it became the way things are. And the way things are, well, they're the way things are. When I was a child in school, I heard America described as a melting pot. I think most of you have probably heard that too, where people from all over the world would come and all get mixed together and all become one. Yeah. Well, people of color were excluded from the melting pot. And the melting pot was more of an indoctrination program rather than a mixing together. People were told that if they took on the values and practices of the dominant European Protestants, that they would be accepted as full Americans. People of color who strove to be white found a margin of acceptance, but they were never fully integrated and accepted because of the color of their skin or the culture of their origin. They were still second-class citizens. In the 1960s, African Americans grew tired of hearing that someday they would be equal, and they were just out of patience. White people told people of color to be patient because white people didn't want to give up any of their advantages that they had. Nobody wants to, give up your privileges or advantages. Of course not. Especially when it means, the support of your family and your children. So many blacks gave up waiting to be accepted and integrated into a dominant society of equals. Many called for a new segregation away from whites to form their own culture, their own enterprises and government. Tensions within African American communities continues to this day. There are over 37 million African American in the United States today. That makes up about 12% of the population. Yet African Americans make up 50% of those who are imprisoned in our country. You can only have statistics, like this, if there is prejudice at work. Scientific studies have shown that with equal opportunity, African Americans are as smart and as capable as white people. So this old idea that blacks don't have the mental ability to hold a decent job has been proven totally false. And the old idea that blacks cannot keep their property neat and their houses clean, that's been proven to be false. You can only have 12% of the population make up half of all the people in prison if you believe in these old prejudicial ideas. Now, these prejudices run through our institutions and with many people being unconscious of them. So when they tell you that they are not prejudiced, well, they probably sincerely believe it. But it's not true. Prejudice and racism is ingrained and systematic. All right, what do we do? What do we do to correct any sin? We repent. First and foremost, we as individuals and as a nation need to stop denying that racism and prejudice does not exist. Racism and prejudice is very much alive and well in this country. Just ask the 46 different hate groups in Michigan alone. Just because we are not vocal about it or a card-carrying white supremacist does not mean that we are not participating or promoting racism and prejudice. In subtle and oftentimes unconscious ways, we are promoting America's original sin. And so we first need to admit it is a sin. But in order to want to do that, we must believe that all people are equally deserving of dignity and respect. We have to accept that white people and people of color are equally human. Prejudice and racism, they dehumanize people. To undo prejudice and racism, we must humanize people. We must give them back their dignity and worth. Why? Well, as Christians, we believe that God created all people. As far as I have read, the Scriptures do not identify any racial or ethnic group of people superior or inferior to another. We are all children of the one God, the Father and Mother of us all. Many white people fear that giving people of color equal status means that they will have to give up their advantages and privileges that they want to keep for themselves and their children. If, as Christians, we believe in the equality of all people made by the one Creator of us all, then those advantages and privileges are not our right, but something which has been stolen from whom they rightfully belong. It is true that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that none of us is free unless all of us are free. People who hoard advantage and privilege deny freedom to others and are not morally free themselves. Giving another equality, it frees us. And we have to be sure that the times are changing in our country. You must realize that by 2050, if things continue as they have, there will be no dominant culture or a racial group. We will be a nation of minorities. Times are going to be changing. Now, let me refer back to the scripture passage from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where it tells us that God desires diversity. God did not intend for us to be homogeneous. That means all the same. We all have a part to play in God's world, and we play different parts. If we do not do our part, then other people cannot do their part as God would want them to do it. We're all in this together. We need to bring racism and prejudice out in the open. We need to identify those things we do and our institutions do which foster racism and prejudice. We need to uncover the racism that is hidden in our structures and systems and bring it to light. Then we need to make it right. We need to recognize and treat human beings as human beings, equally a creation of our one God, deserving of dignity, respect, and worth. And as Christians, deserving of our love. It will not be easy, but we can do that.